There we
We're
go.
live, Chair.
Thank you. Good afternoon, members, officers, and also general public, anybody watching in. Welcome to our Learning and Skills Scrutiny Committee, a very important meeting where we can consider the overall budget, but more importantly for us, our education budget. It's a 10 o'clock start and we're running a little bit late because of some IT issues of people logging in. Item 1 on your agenda are apologies for absence.
Okay, Chair, we've got apologies from Chris James for Education Service, Councillor David Selby and Councillor Jake Berryman.
Cool. Thank you. And members, are there any other apologies? Okay, thank you for that. I assume then we'll have people joining us as the meeting goes on. Item 2 on your agenda is declarations of interest. Any declarations to be made?
I assume we don't have to declare that we're governors of schools.
No, I believe we have a dispensation in relation to that.
Thank you.
And item 3, similarly, declarations of party whip. No? Good. Item 4 on your agenda is our important item, and it's consideration of the draft medium-term financial strategy 25-30, draft 25-26 budget, and capital program for 25-30. Extensive documents. And I know we've already had a little pre-meeting there. Item pages 5 to 194 in your document pack. Councillor Pete, are you wishing to make an introduction to this item?
Thank you, Gwynfor. We've actually got a presentation that I will be going through, but before I do, I'll introduce you to the main colleagues from the department that are with me. Dr. Richard Jones is here as director, Anwen Orrells and Marianne Evans as the two senior officers. We've got Nancy Owen with us as well from the finance side, and Simon Anderson from the ALN side. There are other officers on standby if there are specific questions that fall within their domain. But in view of the ESTIN work that's coming up next week, they're continuing preparatory work for that and will be called in if needed, if that's okay with you, Chair.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Marianne, if you'd like to put on the presentation, I will talk you through. Many of you will have seen most of this before in the private sessions when we gave you all a briefing around the thoughts that we were going through. I thought it was worth talking this through in a little bit of detail to set the scene and potentially answer some of the simpler questions and clarify some of the points so that we can get into more detailed scrutiny. Marianne, if you'd like to go to slideshow and then move to the next slide.
Can you see it now? Or yeah.
No, we still got the next slide.
You see anything?
Well, we can see it, but we got the small screen on the right hand side as well.
Okay. Hold on. Right, how do I go to the slideshow now?
Sit down the display settings. To your left.
No.
Left again.
Marianne,
Yeah.
we can read the main slide if everybody's happy to continue with that with the next slide come in. Are you happy with that? We can certainly read it anyway.
Yeah. Oh. Okay.
Yeah, is members content to move forward like that? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you all. I'm going to talk you through the various sections of the budget for education. I'm going to talk you through in two different sections. I'm going to start off, which we have here is the section for the central service, and then I'll talk about schools delegated on the next slide. The service starts off with a base budget from 24.5 after adjustments for pay of 17.84 million, and this is proposed to increase by 789,000. This is down to pressures in ones you'll probably have heard on a regular basis of pay and other inflationary costs. There are also changes to the way the post-16 grant is dealt with, and this has been transferred. So we've got a pressure there. Where we have early retirement within the school service or within the schools delegated, that's picked up out of a pot that's held within this budget heading. So you've got an increase in early retirement costs that are putting a pressure of £250,000 on the service, and then changes to the pensions contributions. Demographics, in this case, looks to independent placements out of county, and that's cost increases on those. This relates to primarily to ALN costs where we've lost a tribunal and had a placement out of county as a result of that. And this highlights one of the significant long-term risks to the authority that we're looking to mitigate with the ALN strategy, that if we are unable to provide the provision in county and a parent is able to successfully win a tribunal, we have to pick up the costs of whatever the tribunal sets. For us, it's been 220,000 within this financial year, so that materialises a pressure for next year. But I can say, having spoken to portfolio holders elsewhere in Wales, this is quite a small pressure compared to some of the things that they're experiencing. We then have the inflationary increases set into contracts before any changes that we make to them. In this case, the provider uplift for the Freedom Leisure contract. And then in addition to that, we have changes and costs relating to emergency planning and site safeguarding. The emergency planning element comes out of costs that we're incurring as a result of reviews and changes following the sad incident at Bryn Aman earlier last year. And then safeguarding is ongoing costs that are being identified during ESDIN inspections primarily, but also proactive work in advance of inspections on sites where similar problems are identified. The final cost is in relation to uplifts in early years contracts, which is programmed into the contract price, and then other placements out of county where we have children already in out of county placements, which are then increased with their annual uplift. Can we move to the next slide, please, Marianne? The second side is the impact, the proposed savings. In this case, we're looking at some of the savings that were not delivered last year and the savings that are carrying through for new savings this year. As you'll know, officers have been undertaking a review of the usage of swimming provision and leisure centre provision by our schools. And we are now in the middle of a contract renegotiation to align the usage and the payment, because we've noticed discrepancies there. The savings on that are noted there. This doesn't change the service provision. It just brings about an alignment of usage and cost. The second heading is the ALN strategy. As you recall, Scrutiny had the new ALN strategy prior to Christmas or just into the new year. I can't remember which it was now, time's going by so quickly. These are the savings as a result of that budget decision and the implementation thereof. The grant line is what, as I'm sure you realise, all officers are doing across all departments, and that's aligning additional grant funding that sits outside of the revenue support grant to work that is delivered within the service area that fits the alignment, in alignment with the grant. So it's a way of reducing the overall costs and retaining services. In terms of the consultancy and third-party spend, This is broken up of a number of budget headings. The two main ones coming from a reduction in the schools service under Cressy, and a changes in the payments system for schools, within schools for parent pay. There's then a number of small additional changes that fit within that heading to bring it up to the core total. The largest saving is the one that the director has taken the lead on and responsibility for, and that is a comprehensive review of staffing structures within the central school service. This is obviously involving a process of change, consultation and discussions, but I have the assurance of the director that this figure will either be met from staff savings in and of themselves, or if they're unable to meet that within the financial year and deliver a full year effect, it will be met by savings from slippage and other processes. So this is a saving that officers are guaranteeing to me and will be part of their performance reviews in terms of the delivery thereof. Having been bitten last year, I'm not going to get bitten twice on that one. Review of nurture provision is the end results of a pilot that was undertaken previously that has now been discontinued. The preschool specialist centre savings is the year 2 saving. This was a saving in the budget last year, which was only delivered at the start of the new academic year. So this is the 3-month saving that wasn't in last year's budget, but is in this year's one, and is a done deal, for want of a better word. It's something that's already happened, and we're just now picking up the final benefits of it. And then in terms of AI technology, we're looking very closely at AI in terms of savings, particularly around the consultation processes. And that is where we've got the saving identified there. We're expecting other benefits to come out of AI, so this could well be a low estimate rather than a high one. In terms of the undelivered savings from last year, the remodelling of the PRUs, there is now changes going forward with the PRUs as we speak. The documentation will either have been sent already or sometime this week from the head of service to make those changes. And then finally, the Freedom Leisure, this is in respect of the ongoing discussions with Freedom Leisure around costs and contract negotiations. This is the additional work that's come out of the review of school usage over and above just alignment work. Again, on that one, we have officers here that can go into that in a little bit more detail, because it's the interface between community and education, and the focus has largely come from the community side on that. Chair, do you want to take questions on the central service, or do you want me to run through onto schools delegated and do the whole presentation and then come back for questions?
No, I'm happy to go to the central and have some questions there. It'll give us a little bit of structure, really. So, members, you've had a few updates on things that we discussed in relation to our pre-meet, and there may be some answers in there. But listen, please, let's have some questions. Councillor Angela.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm particularly interested to hear more about the education staffing review, the 400,000, but with particular reference to the end of the pack, Appendix 1, starting on page 237. Appendix 1 is about the ALN inclusion strategy for Powys, which has already been before this committee, and we were actually really pleased with it, weren't we, Chair? We gave a lot of praise to that strategy. It's very high level and it's very academic, but you know, it was very ambitious, and we were pleased with it, but we were concerned about how it would be delivered on the ground. So I'm wondering now, what is the impact of potential staffing cuts in delivering that strategy?
Thank you for that, Angela. As I said before, staffing is an internal matter with the director, and there's obvious sensibility. So I'm going to pass you across to the director, because he will be able to tell you what he can say about this without prejudicing any process of change or running into any staffing related HR issues.
Thanks very much, Councillor Pete. Yeah, Councillor Hans, just to respond to that point, it's obviously a whole service staffing structure. It's not just an exercise in cuts. What we're going through consultation with at the moment and management of change is a structure which responds to need, and that's the need in our schools. So in answer to your question, there isn't any reduction in that important resource of our ALN teams. Clearly, we've got wave 1 and wave 2 of the strategy, which needs the resource we've got. And in fact, we're looking at wave 3 and what additional resource needs to be added to wave 3. So the structure is aligned with service priorities, and ALN and inclusion is a service priority.
Okay, thank you, Chair. If I could just come back, that's really reassuring. Thank you very much for that. But I just, yeah, I'm still concerned because, you know, any sort of change management takes time, doesn't it? And that takes officer time. So I am really concerned, does that take officer time away from into, you know, this is a new strategy that's going to be implemented, that's going to take time. But also, if we're going to be managing this change management process, that's also going to take time. So is that undue pressure on the central team to deliver what seems to me 2 big pieces of work at the same time?
I think that's a fair point. Any level of change involves resource, time, and energy. We've been working on this since the beginning of September. We are pacing the process of change well, and we have, as a senior leadership team, identified the colleagues that will be taking leads in particular areas. So I feel confident that we're distributing the pressure of the change. You know, and of course, any sort of change needs to be handled in a way that leaves the organisation in better health after the change has taken place. So we're also mindful of that. But the reality is we do need to change the structures that we've got within the service to meet the current and emerging needs of our schools. So it's just a piece of work that we have to balance. Otherwise, we won't be in the right shape to meet the needs of all of our settings.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And to give you a little bit more reassurance, we've talked for a long time about, as school transformation moves forward, as new and emerging needs are identified and other needs disappear, there will be a knock-on into school central at some stage. Well, with some of the changes we've made already, particularly around automation of some processes, the introduction of the budget software and a number of other reporting software, we've now reached the point where the directors have come to me in September and said we've reached the point where we can look at our services at the centre and look to realign and ensure that we're not retaining people within the service just because we've always retained them. It's something that I've been saying, and to be fair to him, my predecessor was saying that as we move through transformation, there will eventually come a point where transformation will come into the central service and not just be on the delegated budget. And this is the first point at which we've reached that. There may be more in the future, but this is one of those break points. It's also at the point where the new needs that have been coming out of ESTIN inspections and also the changes identified in behaviour and need post-pandemic are coming through as well. So it's all about aligning the council and aligning central officers to what our schools need so that we can deliver the best education for the pupils that are in them.
Dr. Richards coming back.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Sorry, just to make a further point around it. Obviously, this is education change, but we're supported by colleagues from across the authority. So we work really closely with HR, we work closely with finance and legal as well. And also as a corporate leadership team, you'll be aware that we've done work on peer reviews and challenging us as a collective of directors around structure. So while it's an education change, it obviously sits within the context of our council. So we draw support from outside of immediate education officers as well. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you
Chair.
both. Councillor Lucy.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of questions for Pete, please. One is, Pete, you mentioned that there was a potential for reduction in the Freedom Leisure Management fee, which doesn't change the service provision. Are you saying that the whole of that 266k was being spent on we don't know what before now? How can we be saving that amount of money without cutting provision in some way? So that's my first question. And my second question is about the use of grants and ensuring that they are taken from the base cost or added to base cost. So again, I'm concerned if we were using the grants to pay for something else previously, what is it that we're losing if those grants are going to be moved across to pay for other essential services?
Thanks, Councillor Lucy.
What we're looking at with grants is the constant realignment of grant income and obviously different grant income to ensure that base costs are covered in that way. I've been told, we're not actually changing any service areas. We're just identifying the continuation of service provision.
But surely if those grants were being used for items that weren't in the base cost previously, then we are losing something.
Marianne, were you looking to come in then? Or Anwen?
Thank you, Chair. Is that okay if I do come in to clarify around the grants? So Councillor Peter is completely correct around our reorganisation and rationalisation of the grants. But what we've seen, Councillor Lucy, in the last 12 months is a significant change in the grants that have come in from Welsh Government. This time last year, they realigned and reduced the numbers of grants, but increased the pots of money within each one and reduced the T's and C's and amended the T's and C's. So what we've done is adjusted our spend in line with the terms and conditions coming in from Welsh Government. And I don't know if you've read Lynn Eagle's statement a month, 6 weeks ago around the additional monies into the school standards element as well. So some of that will be going out to schools direct as per the terms and conditions, but there's additional monies as well being found by the Welsh Government to support our work, which has been coming in from base budgets previously. Does that clarify for you, Councillor Lucy?
No.
I still have some concerns. I mean, if the overall amount of grant money coming in has increased by that amount of money, then fine. But if it hasn't, then still somewhere something's surely got to have been dropped.
Yeah, we're working within the terms and conditions of the grants, so that's what we're doing and working within the realms that we are. And as you know, Welsh Government do hold us to account very, very closely on our spends of grants. So we do have to submit plans and we do have to provide overview of the impact of the work. So it is monitored very, very carefully.
Okay.
Okay, and the freedom leisure question in relation from Lucy.
Yeah, I'll come in on that.
Thanks,
Chair.
Marianne.
Yes, you will be aware that we have been looking at the schools SLA for quite a while now with Freedom. So a little bit of background, 2015, the contract with Freedom started and it hasn't been, we haven't adjusted the SLA at all in that time. What's happened is we've had a decrease in pupil numbers. We've had a decrease in the number of schools within catchments. So the work that we have done now over the autumn term really is we've engaged with our schools to understand their requirements for swimming, how they're swimming, and sort of have that discussion with them about how do we now, you know, go forward with potentially a more equitable offer across the schools. Some schools swim a lot, some schools don't swim at all, and then there's some in the middle. What became really apparent in those discussions is how valuable schools believe swimming is, particularly in the primary sector, as a life skill. And obviously schools don't want to see a reduction in the swimming hours that they have. The analysis that we've done has shown that the current amount of swimming the schools do is far less than the hours that were contracted in the original contract in 2015. So there is a mismatch. What we are trying to do now is to negotiate with Freedom Leisure about sort of how can we match the contracted hours with the current usage. So that's where we are at the moment. We're starting the discussions now with Freedom, and we'll see where that takes us. But there is a difference between the current usage and the contract, which hasn't, as I said, it hasn't been reviewed since 2015. So there is an opportunity here for us. It doesn't affect the amount of swimming hours that schools will have if this is acceptable to Freedom. Again, that's part of the discussion. So we're very happy to reach the point that we've reached with this piece of work. And we'll inform you as the discussions go forward, and we'll know where we are in a few months' time.
So is that 266k included as a risk then? Because clearly if that negotiation hasn't completed, then there is a risk there.
There is a risk there, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Rowlett.
Thank you, Chair. Just quickly on that one, clearly some schools will have an uplift in their swimming provision. I know some schools go out of county for their swimming. Can I ask how Freedom Leisure are being paid? Are they paid per pupil, per session? Because there's a fixed cost to Freedom Leisure's provision, which is probably quite difficult to change that much, really, apart from potential labour or instructions. How are Freedom Leisure paid? Is it per pupil or per session? Or
it's on a catchment basis, so per hours per catchment. That's the contracted sort of arrangement.
Okay, so and there's probably quite a bit of variation between catchment and what's been happening over the past few years, I'm guessing.
Yes, there is.
Okay. Just very. So some will get more swimming and some will get less, and you'll get near the average for all pupils.
That's the plan.
That's
so,
the theory. Okay.
Yeah.
And you'll keep us up to date. Just a quick comment on the staffing review. Every budget we see, there's always a line in for staffing review somehow. And some of this other stuff as well is why couldn't it be done sooner in previous financial years? I understand that it's a moving picture, but I know we've got an excellent senior leadership team now within educational services. So hopefully we can be far more proactive about getting the right team in place in the future, because there are some schools under significant pressure where the council, quite frankly, is not acting soon enough and supporting change within those schools. So can I have assurance? It's not necessarily always financial. It can be around staffing issues and provision for children and concerns about welfare. Can I have assurance that the new team will be able to deal promptly with challenges that are faced across the schools across the whole of Powys? Thank you.
I'll invite Richard in a minute. I think the thing I can say from the structure that have been outlined to me in the draft stage, there is a clear alignment to payers of high schools and within their cluster there is looking at the need across the county and how it's changed. And there is a strong alignment with the direction of restructuring within the team. You talked about the wider team. We'll talk about delegated in a little bit, but we're now in a position, assuming this budget is approved, where all the focus and effort that we've been putting into schools finance whilst continuing to support it, we'll be able to shift a lot of that focus onto leadership, onto teaching and learning, and actually focus on bringing the same stability and same improvement into those areas that we've spent the last 18 months to 2 years working through on the finance side. But Richard can give you a little bit more detail about the high level without going into details that will compromise the process.
Thanks very much, Councillor Pete. Yes, Councillor Ali, just to provide some reassurance around that. I will say that while the staffing structure brings savings forward, we haven't developed this structure with solely the aim of making savings. It's a structure that I feel responds to a national change in landscape. I think it's an education structure which responds to the current and emerging needs of our schools. I think it's a really proactive and forward-looking structure. And it's a structure that's going to allow us as a local authority to take that strategic leadership role that we need to take. I can't go into the detail of it, and I know you'll appreciate that, but what I can say is the structure brings clarity around roles and responsibilities. It brings very clear accountability in terms of teams and individuals. And very importantly, it's based on a model that promotes collaboration, cluster working, and the sharing of expertise and resource between colleagues. So it's a well thought through structure that responds to the need of our schools and what we feel are national emerging trends as well. I think it's going to allow us to bring that high challenge, set those high standards, but also be able to support our schools with the quality support they need to reach it. So I can give you that assurance.
No, thank you, Richard. I really do appreciate that because there are significant problems, but sometimes we need other parts of the council to support the education team as well. So, Diolch, Richard.
Thank you both. Thanks for that reassurance, Richard. Councillor Gareth.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm just going to start with my questions on cost reductions. Can I start with freedom? Are we saying, Marianne, that we've been paying for things we haven't had provided to us in the past years? And if we are, if that's right, that's what I'm picking up, and I'm not surprised by it. If we are we in discussions with freedom to get payment back for the services we paid for and they haven't provided? If it's a £265,000 saving from that's just reviewing and paying for what we're getting, how many years has that been going on that level?
You're correct, Gareth. There is a mismatch between where we were and where we are now. So the discussion we're having at the moment is just about sort of, can we reduce now? Can we find a solution now? I'm not sure if we can contractually go back and claim, but however, that's something we'll have a look at.
What does the contract say?
I'm not sure that we can, but we'll see. Okay.
Right, okay. And it's interesting you say that it's budgeted on a per catchment basis, because I was the lead member for the Leisure Service Review, and we asked and asked and asked for that information. It was never provided. Can I just ask a question around the staffing reductions? I'm a little bit nervous about this. When 400,000 is a big chunk. I assume by what you're saying, Richard, these changes aren't going to be in place from the 1st of April. So if that's the case, if we make £400,000 saving staffing in 25-26, what's the full year effect of that staffing change? So if it comes in from September, that means there's another 5/12 of savings. So there's another £250,000 saving that would be available in the 26-27 year. Am I right or am I wrong?
Sorry, Gareth. Councillor Gareth, would you mind just repeating that?
Yeah, you've got the £400,000 saving target for staffing. I'm assuming most of that saving won't be implemented until September, which is, so you've only got 7/12 savings. If 400,000 is a 7/12 saving, there's another £250,000. And should that be in the 26-27 savings, or are you just making the 400,000 saving in staffing? And if you don't make it all in 25-26, you're going to take that from other budgets.
Okay, thank you.
Gareth,
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, I understand the
before
question.
Richard answers, Gareth, this is school central, therefore it's just normal terms and conditions. We're not tied to an academic year in some of these commitments. So,
But we're still tied to the same notice periods.
Let's hear from Dr. Richard.
Okay. So in answer to the question, clearly, any management of change process has got to go through consultation, which is where we're at the moment. We're in that process of consultation. So the savings that we've put forward, we feel confident we can make in the financial year that we've indicated. I suppose as with any consultation, especially a significant one like this, things will come forward during the consultation period. There may be further savings at some point in the future, but I can't predetermine the outcome of the consultation. So it's quite a challenging question to ask. What we know about any management of change process is that the consultation has to be a genuine one, and structures may adjust broadly as a result of it.
I don't think it's a challenging question. I'm just asking, what's the date of your implementation of the changes? Are you planning a September implementation, a June implementation, or what date you implement? Or is it going to be a staged implementation for those staffing changes?
Yeah, Councillor, so again, without speaking about individual roles, depending on the outcome of the consultation and what the structure looks like, it would be an iterative. It would be an iterative change. So the savings would be made at different points as we progress through the financial year.
Okay, that's fine. So there's a further saving. If that's the case, then you've got the effect of the full year saving in the following year, so, which has not been put in the MTFP yet. That's my view, and I don't need to reply that.
Okay.
Can I just ask a couple of other questions? In terms of the consultancy costs, Councillor Peake put that included that with the third party spend. There's a £30,000 cost reduction of consultancy. What is that? What's the total cost of consultancy in the year? So is that 30,000 out of 300,000? Or is that 30,000 out of 100,000? Or what's the percentage?
Can I bring Nancy in for that? Nancy, you've got your hand up there.
Yeah. Go on then, Nancy.
Thank you, Chair. So that, Councillor Gareth, that would be the last amount of budget that's set aside in respect of consultants, because
so that's wiping the full budget out, Nat.
Yeah, that's what the service have worked really hard for the last few years, and it's featured in all the previous FRMs as well, is managing that down.
Okay, that's fine. And one final question. I don't think Anwin really answered Lucy's question around the maximising grant. I think what we need to know is, by meeting 130,000 of central costs, additional central costs through grant, is that going to reduce the amount of money available to schools to manage and control?
Can I come in there, Chair?
Go on, Nancy.
Yeah. So we're just to be really clear with the grants and how they come in. So the grants now that we receive in that are specifically for schools, there was some control from the local authorities' perspective previously with the Education Improvement Grant, Councillor Gareth, but they have actually now put a national formula in place since the 1st of April 24. So to be really clear, all grants that are provided by Welsh Government for the purposes of having direct allocations to schools are calculated by Welsh Government, and they are passported through the local authority on that basis. So those grants as they come in will be passported in that entirety, just to be really clear on that.
Thank you, Nancy. That provides the clarity I wanted.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Chloe.
Thank you, Chair. these questions might be around my not understanding something, so they might be quite quick. But just I did following on from the consultancy question and the third party spend reduction. I just wondered what that was, what sort of consultancy activity was being paid for, and that third party spend, just to understand a bit more what impact that might have when they're reduced. And then second question is just wondering, I'm sure it's been done, but just in terms of forecasting on pupil numbers going forwards and the needs of those pupils, we should be able to get a relatively good idea of pupil numbers, but their needs around ALN and other sort of special needs, whether they would be included in the assessments you've done on the need going forwards for funding. Thank you.
Thanks, Chloe. I'll take part of this and then pass across. In terms of pupil numbers, we have a model for pupils running through over a 5-year window that's constantly refreshed. At the secondary level, it's based on the pupils in the feeder schools and how they transition. At the primary level, it's based on live birth information that's supplied in coordination with the NHS, which feeds through for the first couple of years. And then the final years, well, obviously, the children that we're talking about in year 5 or thereabouts have not yet been born. It's based on the trends that are coming through within those catchments. So that gives us a model for the long-term stability of pupil numbers within an area. In terms of identifying need varies over time, and we can only look at the trends that are emerging. And we may be able to give you a little bit more on that. But also I got Simon, if he wants to come in and talk about the emerging ALN trends that we're seeing as well, if that helps you.
Thank you.
Okay, and in relation to Chloe's first couple of questions in relation to consultancy and third party spend, anybody else?
And we'll all take most of those through because they're within that side of the service.
Anwen.
Yeah,
Come on,
Chair, thank you very much. So if I go with, just to follow on Councillor Pete's question, I'll answer for you around the pupil numbers. So just to reiterate, when it comes to the special schools, we have in recent years seen a significant rise in our special needs demands, especially for Ysgol Bryn Llewach, which is the behaviour unit, and those numbers have increased significantly. So that's reflected in FRM, as have also the banding. So when we go into special schools, they're banded from category 1, which is the PMLD, which is most profound learning difficulties, down to number 5, which is a mainstream. And what we're seeing is that banding level is increasing, and therefore the demands and the cost for those learners. So that's what's reflected in there around pupil numbers. And then the second question you had around consultancy and the third party. So I'll carry on from what Nancy answered previously. So back 5 years around the consultancy, we did have a secondary strategy and a significant amount of funding was put in. And at that time, we had significant amount of consultancies coming in to support our schools. Those consultants have now, year on year, as Nancy said, reduced. So they were supporting different elements around looking at the well-being, looking at leadership, looking at teaching and learning. So those have been reduced year on year. Around the third party, it is very much realigning and sort of supporting what we're doing. But probably the one element that may contribute a significant amount is the looking at the elements of the cashless, not stopping cashless by any means, because it's a highly used service by our schools and parents and carers, but looking at how we put that contract out. And there are savings in this year now since we've gone back out to contract in the new contract that's come in.
Thank you. I mean, just a brief follow-up then. That consultancy work sounds like it's actually quite valuable in terms of the work that they're doing. Have they effectively trained up the staff and teams within the schools to be able to undertake things on wellbeing so that they can carry it forward without the external consultancy fees? Or are we then the schools are losing that service of someone coming in and giving them support?
No, the consultants had an impact and did coach and mentor internal staff with them when they were going out on visits. So hopefully we feel that we're in a position now that we are sort of able to take forward that work to the future.
Okay, thank you.
Chloe, the model on the consultancy is one that was put in place 5 years ago with the aim of bringing consultants in and working with a newly established team within the council. So it was a training and support for staff, but training the trainers type model, where the experts from outside, as well as giving direct support to the schools, would also be providing career development and additional knowledge to the staff. It was always aimed, when it was implemented, to taper off over time, and this is the final saving from that taper.
Thank you, Chloe. Thank you, Anwen. Welcome, Margaret.
Thank you. Quick comment, really, on Aled raised something very well, and part of it was staffing structure when he was talking across all schools, and the answer was fine that we had. But can I just highlight, because the answer immediately went to that secondary primary interface, and we are forgetting, and that's why I'm raising it, the vital part that we tend not to look at as much, I feel, at the moment, is that transition from preschool settings into education and that early years. And I'm just highlighting that because that is a vital area.
Okay, any comment on that or reassurance?
It's a general response from me before Richard comes in, and that's we are actively encouraging partnership working between the primary school and the nurseries, playgroups, Kilpatrick and TRV in the areas around them. If you notice, within all of the new build schools, we've had nursery and preschool provision actively within the school environment. So you've got not so much the transition, but you've actually got just changing classrooms. So that's all very much around the community focus of the schools. On the specifics, I see Dr. Richard put his hand up before I started speaking, so I'll pass him across now.
Thanks so much, Councillor Pete. Thank you, Margaret, for those observations. The points you make are points that we've absolutely considered as part of the new structure. So we've got the new structure, again, without going into too much detail, it's a whole team around a cluster approach. So fundamental to the thinking about it has been, how do we ensure that teams from across the authority are not working in silos? So exactly the points you make. Our school improvement advisors from different settings will be working much closer together as part of the new structure. And also the work of the professional learning teams as well, being absolutely inextricably linked with school improvement as well, just to make sure that the offer of support that we're making to schools is aligned with the need in schools. And it speaks to that earlier point I made about our approach of high challenge, but high support to go with that challenge. But thank you for those observations.
Good. Margaret, wishing to come back?
No, it's fine. It's just that I suppose when I go into schools, I do wonder about the staffing and the quality of training that for the age group. Yes.
Okay, we recognise your concern there. Thank you. Councillor Allard.
Thank you, Joe. Just a very quick question. I should have asked it before, and apologies, I wasn't at the pre-meeting a couple of days ago. I had other council commitments. The grant elements, grant elements within any funding is can be a little bit difficult. What percentage of, I think it's about £18 million base budget, is grant funded? Because there's chances Welsh Government might change its mind and create a particular pressure on local authorities, especially when spending reviews are really tight. a couple of lines. The undelivered savings of 390 were those for in last year's FRM for 25-26, and I thought permanent solutions had been found for those undelivered savings, especially the PRU, or did they form a pressure on this year's budget? And is the Freedom Leisure line, I can't remember what that was, is that netted off the 266 line at the top of that page? And also, just general comment on all these slides for all these scrutiny committees. I wish they would put a percentage number down behind the saving or the cost pressure, just to indicate the size of that, because that 266 is £250,000 out of a budget of £6 million ish, and then the consultancy could be 100%, but I just don't know. Well, because I assume you still need a capacity to bring in expertise for unseen events going forward. Sorry, there's quite a few little bits and pieces there.
Yeah, there is. You share my concerns in relation to undelivered savings, and yeah, the percentage thing is we've been asking for many years now. The £6 million you mentioned, Aled, it's considerably more than that.
The total cost of Freedom Leisure.
Oh, the Freedom Leisure. No, it's more
Sorry,
than-
yeah.
Okay.
Nancy's coming in, I think, with the exact details, Councillor Aled, but as would have been noted in the, I think it was the Q2 report, the service were able to identify permanent savings within the service that mitigated a large portion of the PRU saving, but the remainder of that was drawn down against the, Nancy, correct me if I'm wrong, the risk budget as a environment to the school service to cover this year, which is why you're seeing the pressure come through this time.
So why is it on that page rather than
it's there as undelivered savings and the mitigation needed against them?
Yeah, but shouldn't it be on the page above under pressures? Is it part of the total 1.6 million pressures, or?
Nancy, do you want to come in on how it's been managed this time? I kept track of how it was managed last year.
Yeah, bear with me. Okay, so shall I just start with the PRU? The pupil referral unit savings that we started with of around 350,000 in 24-25. And there was a future years saving in 25-26 at that FRM point back at the start of 24-25.
Yeah.
So during the reports this year, we asked for £120,000 virement to reduce the pressure in relation to the PRU saving that hadn't been delivered. And then that left that down to about £233,000 outstanding, which is part of the 390,000, Councillor Aled, that's in the undelivered savings. On top of that, then, when we obviously brought as a service the ALN strategy forward, there was discussions then around how that would form, that undelivered saving would form part of and be considered as part of the budget proposals for 25-26. But we've also then got in the FRM now savings in 25-26, and what didn't appear in the previous FRMs was a further saving then in 26-27 and 27 and 28. So you'll note you've got 110 in 25-26, 79 and 50 thereafter. So the service is trying to mitigate that original saving that was put forward, but it won't be quite in full. So it's been put in the budget as a undelivered saving. The service have been working hard in the financial year that we're currently in, and actually are able to and are mitigating the undelivered savings that haven't been achieved through different areas of spend review. So that that is clear and set out, and the figures have improved during the year around that. So that's the PRU, and then the Freedom Leisure. That's that has been netted off. So it started off as 177,000 in the FRM in 24-25. We have been able to mitigate that slightly, but only around £20,000. And therefore the net effect then has been brought forward as an undelivered saving. And then we've reviewed, or the service has reviewed, the updated FRM requirements with regards to the different discussions that are going on currently.
Okay, there's some clarity there, Aled. Content?
Yeah.
Oh.
Is FRM of the school service published in these documents somewhere?
Not separately, is it?
No, it would be really useful if we could have the FRM of each individual service area within the council, because I know you bring them together to form the whole council FRM, so we can understand the, almost track the savings across the years. It's
Yep.
just something for
Point
the future.
made, Aled.
Thank you, Chair.
Anything further?
Not at the moment.
Okay. Councillor Gareth.
Yeah, sorry. I'm going to go back to Nancy just to clarify that point. So that 300 odd thousand, Nancy, you just talked about regarding Prue and Freedom. Am I right in assuming that that's not being held as a pressure that has to be found by the service in 25-26, or am I wrong in that understanding?
No, that's not been held as a pressure, as I understand it. I know Jane's here as well.
So in effect, what they've already done in this year, they've done to mitigate that pressure in the first year, but not in the next years.
Well, we have got savings still in 25-26, and they feature then in future years.
Okay.
But yeah, it's I think we do need to make, I stress back the point that actually in the reports that we've got now that in the public domain on finance, the service is able to is mitigating those outstanding savings across the service completely, but they're just not being found on a permanent basis in 24-25.
That wasn't the reason I put my hand up, Chair. Can I just support Aled in his request for more information? I made this point in the health and care scrutiny. A couple of paragraphs on each of the proposed cost reductions, cost pressures would make our lives so much easier to understand and most likely reduce the amount of questions we ask. My two questions are around the pressures. The 220,000 that's in for independent out-of-county placements, is that a pressure of current children in out-of-county placements, or is that a pressure for new children that go into placements from September? And my second question is, could we have some more information about the 350,000 pressure around emergency planning and safe site safeguarding and the type of work that will include? Because I got in my head whether some of that should be capital and not revenue, and is that a short-term requirement or is it a long-term requirement? Because as I understand at the moment, it's built in long-term over the 5 years strategy, medium-term financial plan strategy.
Councillor Gareth, on the point around the pressure that's identified there, that is an existing placement. Just as with adult services, we hold demographics at risk.
Okay.
In year, if that risk materialises, it becomes a pressure for the next year.
Thank you, Councillor Peake. That's fine. That's fine.
In respect of the emergency planning and the safeguarding, a lot of the cost is additional revenue put in to meet responses to ESTIN inspections around the site security of schools, primarily the green fencing that is being put in place now. Whether you could argue that is a maintenance, you could argue that it is capital. Either Dr. Richard or one of the finance colleagues will come in and explain why that's sitting where it is in this. Nancy, you want to come in?
So can I just follow up a question? So I understand that, and the school I'm a governor at, we've had some green fencing done in the last couple of years, but surely that must be coming to an end. And if I'm right, there's £1.7 million in the budget, in the MTFP over 5 years for that provision.
Let's
The
go, Councillor Pete, you're unclear on it. Let's get some clarification. Anybody coming in? Dr. Richard.
Thanks so much, Chair. I'll ask finance colleagues just to come in on the financial questions there, but just to explain as well some of the proactive work that's going on around the site safeguarding, as well as in response to Eston inspections. We are now actually property and our school improvement advisors are working very closely together to be proactive in assessing the needs of schools. So I just wanted to make the point that it's not simply in response to Eston inspections around that. It is about the work that we are doing with colleagues from across the service and school leaders and governing bodies as well. Okay, I'll bring a colleague in from finance, or Marianne on the Nancy. Thank you.
Come on, Nancy.
Sorry, couldn't get off mute. I'll double up with Marianne here if that's okay. So I think it's I'm picking up on Gareth's point about the capital. I think it was very much at that point in time of the discussion with the service, and Marianne can come in around more of like the maintenance side of things. You know, we've got a budget held in the service for repairs and maintenance as it stands. So it was looking at the pressures in total on that, and that's why it was included where it was at that point in time. But I don't know, Marianne, do you want to come in as lead over the service?
Yeah, I'll just say here, it's site safeguarding is really, really important for us, isn't it? So what we've been doing for quite a while now is pulling together all the information around our schools in terms of what issues, not only the condition issues that they have, but also, you know, issues around sites. We've got schools with public rights of way coming across them. You know, these things are, they need to be addressed proactively, don't they? But you know, it's not just about waiting for Eston to come in and point things out. We need to be ahead of the game. So there's a lot of work going on around this area, and we're collating all the data. We're also considering and capturing what needs to happen, and then that comes into sort of the forward planning for not only the major improvements work, but also this budget as well. Also, there are things that happen, and we need swift resolution to them. So this budget sort of is covered that as well. Okay, does that explain it?
No. Well, yeah,
No.
I fully understand that we need that money for safeguarding, and there's really importance around safeguarding. But my question was, do we need that 350,000 for each of the next 5 years, or is it going to be spent in 25, 26 as a priority, because that's what we should be doing, and then we can reduce it in 26, 27 or 27, 28.
I hope that that's the case, Gareth, because obviously we need to make sure that our schools are safe and safeguarded. And once we address those issues, then that shouldn't be a problem for it and shouldn't be a cost on it. So,
Right, okay, I'll ask the question a different way. So by the end of 25, 26, are you as service officers happy that all the schools, taking the exception, are as far as you consider safe?
yes.
Okay, that's fine. So we need to put another 350,000 in there. We need to reverse that 350,000 in a future year. Is the point you're making?
There'll always be some issues.
Yeah,
So,
but we're dealing with the backlog now. Once we've got up with the backlog, the ongoing won't be that much.
absolutely, yeah.
Okay, Councillor Ansler.
Gareth stole my question there on the emergency planning, but just to add then, I'm assuming that although it's site safeguarding and fencing, there'll always have to be a figure in there for flooding, trees falling down and other things. So it won't be a nil figure in the future, will it?
It won't be a nil figure. We'll always have some kind of funding, because all kinds of things happen, don't they? So we have kind of risk management.
Okay, so my other question I'd like to ask, linked to really what Margaret was saying about preschool, can you explain more about under slide page 77, the preschool specialist centres and the review of the nurture provision? What 149 and 50 there, Can you tell us more about that?
Page.
Page 77 of the full document. I think it's also on your slide. I think second or third slide. Under proposed savings, sorry.
Sorry, I'm just going back to the slides to make sure I got the right one and give you the right response. So it's preschool specialist centres, a £50,000 saving.
Yeah. That's
the year two saving of a change that was made in the budget last year. It was a proposal that came forward to change the way nurture was delivered across the school's estate and moving from a focused location into moving the provision out across the entirety of the schools. So this is year two saving from a 2-year proposal that's already been implemented.
Okay, so both of these are kind of linked to that new ALN strategy and the way in which that's going to be delivered across the county.
The nurture provision, the specialist centres, the ALN, all of the works and finance changes around ALN are linked to wave workstream 1, 2 or 3 of the ALN strategy.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Croeso, Bryn.
O, diolch yn oes na cyfieithydd, is there a translator? No.
No, not on a Wednesday, apologies.
No, it's all right. Yeah, apologies that I haven't been able to participate as much as I ought to in this meeting, but just I mean, we're all here for an improved educational experience for the children in our county. And ultimately, I think that would be far easier to deliver with more optimally sized secondary schools. I've raised this several times, and generally get agreement, but saying it's undeliverable. And I know I've raised this with Councillor Pete.
Bryn, I don't want to steal your points, but we're currently discussing the central school budget.
Yeah.
You think your comments would be better fixed in when we go into the delegated budget?
So,
your comments are
budget,
more relevant when we're discussing the delegated budget, which will be up now very shortly.
Well, I don't think it makes much difference. I'll keep it very brief. But ultimately, the central school budget is there. Aled was calling for them to support the secondary schools, which quite rightly so. And obviously, if the schools are more optimally sized, they would be easy to run. They would be easy to support. There would be fewer schools to support, which makes everything easier for everybody in the long run. Now, I raised this with Councillor Pete, and he quite rightly says he had massive savings to make, and he wouldn't be able to start to get those savings in with that system because it would take 4 or 5 years down the line for consultations, all that to happen. So the quick question is really, would there be a scope for the officers to just investigate relatively quickly what the effect of reducing the number of secondary schools would have on the running of the overall budget within Powys, so that when the next administration comes in, there'll be a bit more consensus on the way forward with this, because it's going to be. I'm guessing it's a political thing. It's been knocked down the line. But ultimately, I think it needs to be done to provide better education for our children.
Apologies, Bryn. You certainly made that relevant to the central schools budget. So apologies for bringing you up on that. Yeah, I think it's a very relevant point. Would anybody like to tackle it?
Bryn makes an interesting point. I mean, Marianne will come in a minute. There is no reason why we couldn't model various changes, but it is quite a complex issue and has already been highlighted by others, and I've said this outright myself. We have a number of changes already in the pipeline. We've completed the Brokerinian change. Bro Houthgan is still moving towards Welsh medium. there'll be proposals coming forward with respect to the Culham Cymru catchment to align that with the ambitions of the WESP in the near future. But for most of our schools, we are well aware that we need to focus on teaching and learning and looking at the provision being offered to our children today as well as our children tomorrow. And the one thing that I've learned from talking to portfolio holders elsewhere in Wales and in England is that a school that is running well, run effectively, and running with good educational standards is easier to bring together with another school without the standards slipping during that merger process. So my focus on the high school side at this stage is very much on stability and bringing up the education standards, looking after the pupils we have in school at this particular time, whilst looking at wider catchments, looking at the provision that we have at the primary level where there is more scope for rapid reorganisation, so that we're in a position that we've got schools that if mergers or changes are needed, they're in the strongest position when those changes come through. So that's my political position. And Dr. Richard or Marianne.
Well, I'm gonna go back to Councillor Bryn really, because you made it very clear where you stand politically. Bryn, I'm going to bring you back on that because I know you'll want to comment.
Yeah, thanks, Gwynfor. Yeah, I appreciate that, you know, there's more than one way to skin a cat, and the merger proposals could be a way looking forward, ultimately to reduce the number of schools, and that's a good thing. I have to admit I'm a bit skeptical on the all through schools that they've been created. I wasn't happy with them with the last administration created them, because if there is any advantage to the primary school that gets merged with the secondary school, well, that advantage is not given to the other primary schools in the catchment. And how much advantage to the secondary school there is, I'm not sure. If it was a model such as happens in Dolgellau, I think, with one head teacher over the whole cluster, you can see potentially that the advantages would be more fair. So I don't think the mergers that happened with secondary and primary were a brilliant idea, because it was in the case of Brohadgen and Llanfair, it was the language being used to save the schools rather than the schools being used to save the language. But yeah, I appreciate it. Could go on, but I'll leave it at that. Diolch, Gwynfor.
Okay, I'm going to bring Marianne in here now as well.
Yeah, fine. Just go back to your original point, Councillor Bryn, on the modelling. We have previously looked at the whole life costs of various models and sizes of schools. So that is something that we could look at. We would then, it's not just simply what's the impact on delegated budget, but it's everything, isn't it? So it's capital costs, transport costs, staffing costs, everything, change costs. It's something that we could be doing, but and that's something that we can look at going forward. But at this point in time, I think we're focused on delivering the current strategy that we have around all through schools, etc. So I'll leave it at that. But that's something that we can do if required.
Good. I think Bryn makes a very relevant point, and it is up to us as local members to increase political pressure. Yeah. Good conclusion, Bryn. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Councillor Aled.
Just a quick comment on what Councillor Pete said a moment ago. It doesn't really sit well with the capital programme that we have in front of us. We will discuss that at some point. Will that be part of the delegated budget discussion or not? But doesn't leave that to one side. The finance officers were talking about mitigating, using other budgets to mitigate other costs. In Nancy's response to me earlier, but what were those budgets originally intended for? Because something else has not been done to mitigate costs under delivery in other areas. So it'd be, I assume that the budget does not have that enough significant slack to allow costs to be mitigated without any impact on other services. But my main point is around transport. I know school transport lies in the HGR service. I feel sorry for the HGR service because the education service generates the pressures, and the HGR has to find the funding for them. So but I know there's a whole council approach at the same time. In the past, there was support for post-16 children who wanted to go out to county to excel in some particular areas of education that they don't have access within Powys as a form of grants to go to other parts of the UK to achieve their educational aims. Is that still in place? And also, when it comes to transport, will you be stopping pupils who want a Welsh medium education travelling out of county to Ystalyfera in the future? Thank you.
Okay, couple of questions there. Nancy's got her hand up in relation to dragging budgets from different places.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So Councillor Allen, no, I think just to re-emphasise what Dr. Richard touched on before in the service, this is very much around like vacancy slippage, utilisation of grants, which obviously you've seen reflected in previous years' FRMs of the service as well. So it's not about stopping anything in terms of the service that's in here. There are, and all services will have it, general vacancy slippage in here, which will contribute to it. Perhaps activity on some areas that hasn't been as high as we would expected, additional income perhaps that we've managed to achieve over and above the budget expected. So yeah, it's very much around those different areas, reviewing everything, which we do, as part of as an education leadership team. I'm part of that team, and that support and challenge to the service around reviewing all their budgets and making sure that they're appropriate in the right areas. And some of that information that's, in the finance reports in 24-25 is reflective of some of the services savings that's been put forward and has been in previous years also.
Thanks, Nancy.
Okay, and then Marianne, please.
Mary's muted.
Sorry. Given on the Ystalyfera out of county transport, Aled, just to say that until we've got alternative provision that can match the range of provision that Ystalyfera can offer, we will carry on providing transport. We can't compete with Ystalyfera at the moment.
You're muted again, Marianne.
Okay.
I think she finished.
Sorry. Can I come back very quickly on that? But the distance doesn't seem to be an object within some catchments within the council. So there is provision within Powys.
I would argue that the Ysgol Gyfun Ystalyfera is the Welsh medium, a designated Welsh medium secondary school, which we haven't got in the county currently. We're moving towards it in the north, but obviously in the south we haven't got the same provision. So when parents ask for that Welsh medium offer in a designated Welsh medium, we do provide the transport down to Ystalyfera. And in fact, it's closer, isn't it, to most of the children down in the Ystalyfera area.
Okay, thanks, Alan. Councillor David.
Sorry, no, the question.
Sorry, David.
You grants and stuff for the transport cost to other parts of the UK for post-16.
I'm going to have to check that one, Aled. Okay.
Yeah, happy to have an update on that, members.
Diolch, Marianne.
Councillor David, portfolio for finances.
Thank you, Chair. Just very briefly, I don't know if I heard Councillor Aled correctly, but there seemed to be some inference of there being a lot of slack in this budget, or potential slack in the budget, because you've only got to look at the level of risk held in the budget, which will point to the fact that there is no slack in the budget. So just to reassure members that there isn't slack in this budget. Thanks.
No, I totally appreciate that, Councillor David. I'm just querying. Most budget lines have been, or grants paid are expected to deliver some outcome, and I was just wondering if there's a bit of a mismatch. But what Marianne was saying about Ystafell clearly goes against the new school transport policy. But we can have that a discussion another day, I'm sure, Marianne. Diolch.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to bring the conversation in relation to central funding now to an end. We've got to get on to delegated and possibly some capital funding. So, Councillor Pete, members, I'm assuming you're okay to continue without a break. Please shout now if you want a break, or I'm going to go back to Councillor Pete to take us further through his presentation. Members were scheduled for a 12:30 finish, so I'm mindful of that as well, Councillor Peter. I know the delegated budget is very, very important to us, but we are scheduled to finish at 12:30.
Thank you, Chair. If Marianne brings us to full slideshow and moves on to delegated. As we move forward with the delegated budget, the base budget, again, we start off at 88 million and proposing to move it up to 96 million. A lot of the detail behind this was in the Cabinet paper that came to Cabinet in December. The reason for that coming forward was to enable schools to actually have recalculated estimates so that they could modify any processes of change. And I'll touch on the impact of this right at the end. Again, we've got inflationary pressures from pay. We've got demographic pressures. We touched on this previously when talked to you about the different bandings that go into the special schools. Whilst the numbers have increased in special schools, so has the level of intensity required, which creates a pressure on the system. Teachers' pension costs are also increasing, and we've got the demographics of out-of-county changes coming through as well. You've got a deflation cost on utilities. This is, as you know, we have national contracts. Whilst this varies from school to school, depending on the type of heating they use, the overall costs are falling within our contracts, and we're able to put a deflationary pressure in here. Rates valuations is an annual pressure that's varied, and you're seeing that coming through. And then pupil numbers are changes based on the actual numbers that we had in schools. If you recall, in a previous session, we talked about pupil numbers when it's budget time being budgeted for, but then actually by the time we get to September and get the actual numbers, those figures aren't always the same. So what we're seeing here is the realignment of the budget from the 24-5 for the actual numbers, and then a prediction of the 25-6. And then at the bottom, we've got a stable funding formula now. There have been changes up and down over several years. We got the ALM provision changes in, and this is now the gap between what was there, what the Welsh Government had paid through, and what we had budgeted in, which gives us a position where the school's delegated budget is now fully funded after 2 years where schools have been undergoing processes of change to realign the budgets that they had inherited post-COVID, with a lot of grants going through, and aligning their staffing numbers over time with the pupil numbers that they have with them. So in light of the solid work done by the funding formula, the review group, and then the hard work within schools, both the school service on the finance side, looking at the finance plans, the work done by support going in for the deep dives, looking at variations across schools, looking at timetabling and similar. We've pulled the schools into a position where we are now in a position where we can fully fund the formula in the expectation that schools have aligned their budgets with the formula. Sorry, not their budgets, their staffing loads with the formula for what they have. So this has taken us from the position that you saw when we last looked at school funding to a position where I'm told as of yesterday, all bar 4 or 5 schools are now coming in at a balanced in-year budget if they complete the changes that they proposed based on the new figures. And there's work ongoing from school staff to actually look at the reasons behind a couple of schools where it looks like there may need to be changes to the funding formula in the future. Obviously, we're in a public session, so I'm not in a position to talk about individual schools' budgets at this time, but I'm sure we'll revisit the schools' budgets when they come in fully positioned May or June time. If we move on to the next slide. These are just, we've had a lot of conversations about transformations. I think it's worth highlighting the changes that are coming through, some immediately, some in the future, in terms of both the revenue savings from the changes that have been made. So in this case, the closures of Irvine Valley and Llangedwin are actually changes that are realised and reinvested in the school's delegated budget this year. The changes at Cullen and Derwin, Treowen are moving forward when that is fully completed after the new build on that site. That is what we will see there. And then obviously as a Schoolborough Corinium moves along the language continuum to a fully Welsh medium school, we'll see savings coming out of that as they move their position within the funding formula as to how they're funded. If we then move on to the impact on the maintenance backlog, these are the changes that we will see in terms of avoidance of maintenance as a result of those two proposals. And then finally, if we look at, we talked about pressures held at risk. We're holding an additional 100,000 for responsive site safeguarding. If you recall, there were a lot of recommendations came forward immediately after the incident in Ammanford. So there is a provision held at risk to respond to anything that comes out of any final reviews of that, or if something else emerges somewhere else in the country. And then, as we highlighted the pressure on out-of-county placement, we're holding a similar amount at risk within the risk budget, should there be need for similar provisions as a result of tribunals in the coming financial year. That's the summary on this. I mean, obviously, there is detail here, but not as many direct savings because the changes that make up the savings are within individual schools' budgets.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Pete. Row of questions already. Councillor Sue.
Thank you, Chair. This came up in our pre-meeting. I was just wondering, we didn't really know then, in the teachers' pensions, were the national insurance contributions included in?
Yep, it's a good question.
Nancy's going to come in on the details of that one.
So it's not included, Councillor Sue, in here, but it's assumed it will be fully funded. So when we've done the formula allocations to schools, now that we've just updated them with, we've assumed that the NI is flowing through the funding formula principles and has assumed it will be fully funded in there also.
Thank you.
Nancy, just to develop that further, there's a very strong rumor that 70% funding may be the figure that's coming forward. So that assumption should be held as a risk, perhaps.
I'll have to pick that. I'll pick that up with officers then, behind the scenes, Councillor Gwynfor, but that's how we've approached it currently.
Okay, that's absolutely fine. Has any approach been made to the finance officer at Drakeford in Welsh Government or not? To get some clarity? Jane's coming in.
Yeah, I can confirm we did respond to the provisional settlement as part of the consultation, and that was clearly one of the factors that we raised within that consultation document about having some level of assurance, hopefully within the final settlement around that, because it is a huge risk, obviously, for the council. I think in terms of the 70% funding, a lot of that's going to be dependent on the funding mechanism and how it's distributed to authorities. So we may say different levels of funding at different authorities, because obviously it's only direct costs that are proposed to be funded. And again, we flagged that up as a concern in that consultation too.
Okay, thanks, Jane, for that. Councillor Lucy.
Thank you, Chair. My question is about Councillor Pete saying that the schools are fully funded under the funding formula. My concern is that we know that there are a number of schools that, while they may be about to or hoping to produce a balanced budget under the funding formula, they're really struggling to do so, and the only way they can do so is by cutting staff. And inevitably this will have an effect on the curriculum at a time when the Welsh Government are looking at increasing the number of subjects available to pupils in Key Stage 4 and the number of exams available for them to take. And I appreciate that might not be happening this year, but you know, if we're cutting staff numbers this year and then looking to increase the number of subjects available in future years, that doesn't seem to make sense. And I'm concerned that we've asked a number of times to, as a scrutiny group, to see the results of the deep dives that have gone on into some of the schools that have been struggling to meet their budgets. And we've not seen those, and it would be really helpful to understand better how those schools are managing to make their budgets balance and work within the funding formula. Thank you.
Thanks, Lucy. I'll bring Anwen in a minute, but the first thing to say, you're right about Key Stage 4 and the qualifications expansion. It is something that I discussed with Anwen and Dr. Richard. It doesn't affect this year, but it does affect the funding formula reviews, and it is going to be a piece of work that the formula review group will be looking into. I'll pass across to Anwen though to expand on that and the other detail around individual schools.
Chair, can I come in then?
Yeah, come on.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Lucy, for your question. So if I go around the Key Stage 4 element, so there's two parts to this. Firstly, we do have a ongoing evaluation of the funding formula, and it is part of the work that we're currently doing is understanding the impact of the national changes and what changes we may require to address that change. So that will be probably coming to you in the summer stroke early autumn for consultation and proposed changes to the funding formula. So that's a piece of work that's already underway and will be coming your way. And then when it comes to the deep dives, it is very difficult because we were very dependent on the head teachers and governing bodies having full trust, open and transparency with us and the independent consultancies. And they have responded exceptionally well. So perhaps I would suggest that if you do, we'd need to go into a private session there because obviously it's very, very individual to each individual school.
Councillor Lucy, I'll give you an opportunity to come back there.
Yeah, thank you, Gwynfor. I mean, that doesn't really explain how you can be confident that that schools actually will manage within the funding formula, particularly if you're having to review the funding formula. That suggests that actually schools maybe will struggle to manage within the existing funding formula. So I do, yeah, sorry, Anne, go on.
Sorry, yeah, I think what I wanted to express there is that the curriculum changes come in from September 27. So that's why we're looking at it now. That's where the additional vocational and academic subjects are coming in. So we're hoping to have that consultancy and that consultation, forward for you for this summer, early autumn, to reflect that ready for the changes when they come in September 27.
Okay, so are you confident that we're providing that schools who are having to make significant cuts in order to meet with the funding formula are actually able to provide the breadth of curriculum that they should be providing?
We are, there is a little bit of work we're doing in the background for some certain categories of schools that are probably the ones that Councillor Pete mentioned, one or two, well, few schools that are just struggling. We have done incredibly deep work with them and understanding exactly their pressures. So that's a piece of work we are doing. And just to reiterate, when it comes to the results of this in-depth reviews we've undertaken, it's interesting. Different schools are seeing different pressures and different changes. So we're reviewing all of them. But hopefully, if you in the cabinet paper that was written for December, we gave you a good overview of the challenges that our schools are facing.
You content, Councillor Lucy?
As content as I'm likely to be, I think.
Yeah, no, I'd like to develop it a bit further. And thanks, Anwyn. In that paper that went to Cabinet, I don't think it gave us the confidence, and it's something which has been underlying with us in relation to deep dives for some time. You've given us assurance that you can bring that forward at some point in a confidential session. It's difficult for us to be content with the budget when schools continually tell us that they cannot meet the needs of delivering the curriculum. And Lucy says forward delivery of that curriculum may be a problem. So you can understand how difficult we as a scrutiny committee, without not having the confidence that we're supporting the schools in the manner we are. And the deep dives was an assurance which was given by yourselves that this would help rectify a lot of things. We still haven't got that confidence, in my opinion. So that's where we're a little bit uncomfortable with it. Is that a good summary, Councillor Lucy?
Yes. Oh.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's a fair comment. And I did earlier this week ask officers to approach the high schools and see if we could find one that not only was willing to share the content, but actually might join us at a scrutiny meeting to take us through their experience. But obviously that was earlier this week in anticipation of the questions today around that, and hopefully that will come forward in the relatively near future.
That's an interesting point, Councillor Pete, and I've just strengthened that we're basing our information on being governors in school, and we're seeing the pain that schools are going through. And let's bring to your attention the report that came before our scrutiny, and I'm not saying it's a reflection of us, but the school standards had slipped. And yes, at that time we didn't put that in down to school budgets, but it's obviously a concern for the scrutiny committee. Okay, Councillor Gareth.
No, Chloe's before me, Chair.
All right, Councillor Chloe. Not on my list. Councillor Chloe.
Thank you. It will be quite quick. It kind of follows on well from Lucy's, really. I was just wanting to understand a bit more about the what engagement and discussion has happened with the schools. Obviously, we've been looking at how they've managed to set a budget, but have they been able to feed into this budget that we're doing as a council, and what are their thoughts and views on how it could impact on them? Obviously, there's lots of governors' schools here. I'm not a governor of a school, but I do hear about how challenging it is for them. So it would be quite good to hear that the council, when setting this budget, is doing plenty of engagement.
It's a good question, Councillor Chloe, and we do have a school budget forum, which is predominantly made up of the school service. They'll be meeting very shortly. I think it's the second week of February. Be good for you to have a listen into that, because it obviously does put a different perspective on it. But yeah, officers, please update Councillor Chloe on that.
Thanks.
Richard or Anwyn, please speak freely, guys.
Oh, thanks so much, Chair. So there's a number of yellow hands going up now. I was just going to pick up on Councillor Lucy's point, but it will speak to Councillor Chloe's point a little bit, and then I'll hand over to Anwyn just to add some further things in around the engagement. I just wanted to make the point that the adjustments to the funding formula are one part of the work that we're doing. So what sits around that is, the work that the finance team do with schools in the team around the school approach. So the new finance tools that we've rolled out across schools, the professional learning that we're offering to, I can see Nancy nodding, so she might want to come in, but the new professional learning that we're offering to head teachers and business managers as well. So it's not simply about the funding formula. The funding formula is one part of it, but it's actually about how we work with our schools to upskill in terms of financial management, to challenge, but also support, like I said previously. So it's one part of a wide suite of the ways that we challenge schools and work with schools to support them to live within their funding envelopes. Nancy, you might want to add to that, and Anwyn, you may want to add to the engagement bit.
Nancy, do you want me to go first, or you're going to go first? Sorry.
Go on,
Okay, I'll
Anwyn.
go first. So just to add to what Richard has just said there, Councillor Chloe, to reiterate, what happens is we have a formula review group which consists of business managers and head teachers from a range of schools across Powys, and they're a significant part of reviewing the funding formula to make sure that it serves the needs of our schools and learners. So that's an ongoing process. And then what we do, it has been annually, but we've used this year for an evaluation point, but then there's a full consultation. So if we're tweaking or amending any of the funding formula, that goes out to all governing bodies and head teachers and schools to put their comments. So there's a full consultation process, and it'll come to this scrutiny committee as it would do then to cabinet for final ratification. So there's a very, very robust system there so that all stakeholders have an input into our work. And then there's another element. We have a budget forum, a statutory committee, and on the budget forum, that's also an area where governors, head teachers, business managers and lay people as well can contribute and discuss the pressures faced by schools and their comments on our funding formula and different elements that we do to support the professional learning and the different school level agreements, etc., or service level agreements that we have with schools. So there's many, as Richard was said, elements to coming up with a formula, and in the end ensuring that we have a consultation process on it.
Okay.
And yeah, just really briefly, just wanted to come back quickly on it sounds like there's really good discussion going on, and it goes backwards and forwards, which is good. I always get a bit concerned when I hear the word consultation, because I feel like it doesn't really offer people the opportunity to input their own ideas to it. It's just the structure that we've come forward with as a council. So but it sounds like there's lots of other things in place where there are those full discussions, so that's great. Thank you.
And they do input on those early stages, which is the very important part. So they do have that full input. And we make sure that we have head teachers and governing bodies, representatives from different areas of the county, because the needs are different, but also from different size schools as well. So primary, large, small, Welsh medium, dual stream, English medium, etc. So those voices are heard.
Brilliant. Thank you.
And Nancy, just to cover off this, please.
Yeah, I just touch on, well, the formula review group, obviously it is good practice, and local authorities do it in different ways. We've had a lot of whole scale reviews over a number of years, but there's also then the opportunity, and I know other local authorities do it as well, to just look at specific items within the funding formula. I mean, we did look at only a couple in last year. However, it was very big for the service in terms of and the schools in terms of the ALN changes that were made. So, while it was only a couple of items that were tweaked, actually the ALN changes that were made were done in respect of trying to ensure that rather than having the band-led funding, which we previously had, where once a child left, the money went back into a pot within the service and then was used then for future pupils coming through. It tries to give the school as much chance to use that pot in totality as they see fit in the school without it changing during the year. It will change depending on obviously the needs that are coming through, because it's linked to the TUVI system. But you know, that's been quite a significant change, and the recognition then of the deprivation element firmly in the formula as well. So yeah, and we'll say we have commenced, and we'll be working with our colleagues around that. There's also the opportunity from a Welsh Government's perspective for colleagues in the school sector and in business managers sector to be part of working groups as well and contribute to discussions on formulas and you know the whole national piece as well. So I just wanted to come back in on the formula piece to start off with, and then just touch on Dr. Richard's points around you know, everything else other than the formula. And I think, you know, there's significant work going on. I've said this before in our schools around the financial challenges that they faced over the last few years, and schools work really well with the local authority, and we work together on, you know, working through those changes, and it's about, to my mind, the tools that are in place and the support in place to help schools. So I know Anwin's we touched on, and Councillor Lucy just brought out then with regards to the in-depth reviews, but we also then do, you know, analysis of everything else other than staffing with our schools as well, to ensure they're using the resources as effectively as possible. And we've also got, you know, other items with regards to the training. We're seeing a bit more uptake on training more recently. We've got financial working groups that include governors and head teachers to ensure that the information that is coming to head teachers and governors, they're content with, and it meets their needs to help them have the tools to do the job. So, you know, there's many different things going on in the sectors, but, you know, we're working really closely with all those schools to look at how they mitigate the pressures they still find themselves in. But, you know, we will always look at tweaks to the funding formula. We've got to, and we've got to review it. And, you know, there are things coming through, like Councillor Lucy mentioned, and Anwin then around the key stage 4, you know, and that's national, and we have to think about that in our planning for any changes to the next formula. So, you know, we've already commenced it. We've got work to bring back to the formula review group, and we'll update Schools Budget Forum and work with Schools Budget Forum and take their comments on board during that process. Thank you.
Thanks, Nancy. Just before we move on to Councillor Gareth, I mentioned the school budget forum, and just a bit of clarification is this: Angela's put in the chat box about notification of those meetings. I sit on the committee as an observer. Is it a public meeting? Can members of our scrutiny committee view in or not? No. Am I taking that as a no, Anwin?
Yeah, so it's a recorded meeting for minutes purposes, but not on Zoom or not on not on Zoom for the public domain. No.
Okay, members, you'll have to rely on me for updating you on that, and we do have a very good chair of that committee currently who does update us with their views and opinions. So we'll have to rely on that. Councillor Gareth.
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions. Before I ask my questions, Chair, can I express my disappointment in the fact that it's only this week that Councillor Pete's asked for information around a deep dive to come to committee? We asked for that back in June, July. You know, I've also asked for a deep dive in my own primary school. That's not happened, just to note that. Can I ask a question around the rates? What's the detail beyond that 205,000? Is that in respect to rate revaluations from April 23? Or is it in relation to new schools or a mixture?
It's across the board, Councillor Gareth.
Because I assume the inflation increase is being picked up in the pay and prices increase that Councillor Pete mentioned as part of his presentation.
We've included it. The rates, what we've done is looked at the rates charges and where there's any pressures coming through into the system, or where there's been rates re-evaluations the other way around. In that case, that's been pulled together in terms of a net position with regards to the rates.
So how is that? So if we need 205,000 in 25-26, I assume there's an overspend on rates in 24-25. How's that being met? How's that difference being met?
We had we had a credit that come through from previous rates re-evaluations. Okay. So we've used that in the delegated area for that.
Okay, right. Can you, and I think this may be Nancy, I'm confused, and I'll tell you why I'm confused. And I'd like a bit more detail about the funding gap and the school formula review. But can we start off with the pupil number impact for September 24 and also the one projected for September 25? Because if you look at the MTFP for mainstream schools, we're projecting a reduction in funding for pupil numbers in 26-27. So I'm wondering why we need that extra funding in September 25.
Am I okay to come in there, Chair?
Yep, go for it.
Yep. So the 1.8 million pound, if I take it in order, the 1.8 million pound was the original GAP members will remember in terms of the pressures that were coming through at the point the FRM was pulled together, and it originally there was a more of a gap previously, but the actual consequential that came in from Welsh Government in the March was fully directed to schools. In its entirety, it's about 631,000, which meant that the gap actually versus the pressures at that point in time was the 1.8 million.
So that 1.8 million isn't the figure required to fully fund the formula in 25-26.
That's 24-25. That's the
okay.
Yeah. Okay. So that's the 1.8, Councillor Gareth. Then in relation then to the pupil numbers, once we'd got the pupil numbers on the count date and pulled those through to the funding formula, the demography change that we'd expected and estimated created more of a pressure rather than the original demography amount we had in the FRM. So it led to a pressure on pupil numbers.
For the current year.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and just to be, can I just be clear on that? That is very difficult to estimate in a lot of cases because it will depend on the actual number on roll and how those pupils sit within the funding formula.
So just very briefly, then just say how we fund based on pupil numbers. Is it so many months on one figure and so many months on another figure?
No, it's still the count date from October half term. So the Friday following the October half term.
Right, so the 309 is a difference between what went in the regional FRM for 25-26?
24-25.
Okay.
Did you pick that up, Gareth? Yep.
Yeah, I'll accept what Nancy's saying because that's fine. And the figure then for 25-26 is just an estimate.
Yeah, and I think the thing is, Councillor Gareth, there is a contingency pot held on delegated because within the actual consultation process we took through a couple of years ago, schools are allowed to put forward business cases. So, for example, in the last year, or the year we're in, sorry, I'm already in 25-26, in this year, if schools have had an increase in pupil numbers that has led to them being able to not manage within the current structure, they can put a business case forward to the local authority. So that will be reviewed by Anwyn's team around whether that business case is reasonable and whether there's anything that could be done in the school to mitigate any additional costs, obviously. But if that's not the case and there is a pressure on that school, then we have to consider then that, and that forms part of a business case, and that's part of the pupil number changes that's in Councillor Pete's presentation as well. So it's having a contingency there for any fluctuations in pupil numbers.
Sorry, and what size is the contingency pot you mentioned?
I have to get back to confirm it with you because we're just working through all the 25-26 elements now. So if I can bring that back.
Yeah, what size was it for 24-25 at the start of the year?
I haven't got the figures on me. Can I come back to you on that, Councillor Gareth?
Yeah, can you just send me an email sometime today?
Yeah.
Hopefully before 3 o'clock.
Okay.
Because I got a meeting at 3.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
No pressure. Finished, Councillor Gareth?
Yeah, thank you. So I'll put my hand down.
Yeah, Councillor Allard.
Thanks, Chair. I was just going to ask around that contingency pot. How much has been used as well? If you can inform us how much has been used in the last year, just to understand the importance of it. Question firstly, just a question to Jane really around the national insurance. We can discuss the whole council area on Friday at the finance panel. But just to understand the exposure of the education or schools to this, what is the additional cost of the national insurance changes in the budget, last autumn's budget, just so we can understand if it's 70, 80, 90 or 100% fully funded, so we can just understand the risk. What is the total sum? Because there's a lot of TAs and things, I'm guessing, and catering, well, catering's not here, but catering staff, which are fairly low hours, aren't they?
I haven't got the breakdown between individual service areas. I'm looking to see if Nancy might have that for schools handy, but I think it was about 3.2 million across the whole council for direct staff. So a significant pressure, obviously, in terms of that. But as I said, in terms of how much we get, it will be dictated very much by what the overall pot is across all authorities, and then the method in which it's going to be allocated through the settlement or via a grant or however. And I think it's that level of detail that we need clarified really to give us some certainty. We've done some quick calculations ourselves. So based on the limited information that we do have, and that gives us a level of confidence, but not complete.
Yeah, no, it's just trying to understand the risks.
Yeah.
When you're pulling the budget together. No, thanks, Jane. But back to the delegated budget. Last year, the equivalent paper last year didn't set out the pressures faced by the council, faced by the delegated budget. There were zeros in, is it table 5 or table 6? It's always the same table every year that I go to initially, but there were zeros. What was the total pressures faced at last year's budget, or for this current year, actually?
Can I?
Was that the 1.8 million pounds you were talking about, Nancy?
Yes.
So after that additional money from the autumn statement, the remaining pressure was 1.8 million.
Yes.
After the uplift.
Yes.
Okay. How much do you have figures there of how much reserves were used by schools in 23, 24, and this current year as well?
I think that's in table 7 in the document pack, is it?
Table 7. Which page, Gwynfor?
Oh gosh, you're putting me under pressure now. Yeah, but Nancy, if you can answer it, please do. Don't rely on my information.
No, it's fine. I just lost the file. Sorry.
Yeah, you're talking about the overall reserve of the council now, are you, Gwynfor, rather than the schools?
No, I think that's in relation to education, I think.
I'll just find it and come back in if that's okay, Chair.
Okay.
No, that's fine. Continue, Aled.
And so Councillor Pete reassured us that the pressures are fully funded this year, but that's assuming that the schools have realigned their staffing to cater for the underfunding in the previous couple of years, and they've had to use a reserves budgets to cover that balance. So in theory, this year, there shouldn't be any additional draw on any reserves going forward, should there, if they all set in-year balanced budgets. So can Councillor Pete tell us the reductions in FTEs, teachers and teachers assistants and other support staff within schools that's happened over the last year, this year, and expected this next year, so we can understand the staffing levels of staffing that have been reduced. And we must remember the support staff within schools as well, especially secondary schools. So to ensure that head teachers and senior management can really focus on improving school standards rather than doing the running of day-to-day functions within the school. So do you have the figures for the number of teachers employed in those three financial years.
I think it's an important point for us to understand the pressure that schools have been, or the actions that schools have undertaken.
I don't have those figures immediately to hand. What I would reflect on, though, is that we have had quite significant variation in pupil numbers, and we haven't historically seen a realignment, with a lot of schools relying on either deficit budgets or drawing down on balances. What we're seeing now is a catch up in that process. But I notice Nancy has got a hand up, so she may be able to give you some more detailed information.
Okay, but we do have, in high schools, with my experience, the contact time is at the limit for according to teachers' contracts. So it does sort of indicate that there's little room for maneuver within some schools. Sorry, Nancy.
Yes, can I just come in there? So can I start with the national insurance? Sorry, because I just made my notes as we were going along. So the national insurance estimate, we've got based on the funding formula principles, which may be different to what schools have actually got in place, is just around the £1 million mark. But you will need to appreciate, there's a lot of grants going in there. That is not in that figure. So if they're using grants for staff, that won't be in that figure. We'll only fund the funding formula principles, and that's at around £1 million.
Okay, thanks, Nancy.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, Nancy. Can you explain that to me again then? So if a TA or something is supported by a grant, you won't be supporting their national insurance, the cost increase of their national insurance?
We've seen there's been an increase in grants previously. So in this financial year now in Q3, Councillor Aled, there has been an increase in the school standards money via the local authority education grant that's been passported to schools by Welsh Government to support with additional funding to support the school budgets in that respect. We also seen that with the post-16 grant. We had an extra 210,000 in before Christmas to contribute towards the impact of the pension and pay award. So we'd often see the grant elements coming through from Welsh Government to support any grant funding. And not all schools use grant funding necessarily towards staffing. But we, as a council, in all our planning, we only fund the funding formula principles within the finance resource model, unless there's something coming through, like we've just discussed with Anwen now, around any national priorities or any changes that the formula would group with our head teachers and our governors want to consider.
Okay.
Okay,
Can you think of any other ways to make it even more complicated or not? But
yeah, but I think there's a bit of confusion surrounding your question here, Aled. You were more indirectly asking in relation to the legislative change in the budget round. That won't be picked up by grant funding. Is that what you were?
Yeah.
Aled, I think what Nancy was saying was that we can identify a potential £1 million cost of national insurance that stems from the funding coming out of the funding formula. That is what we can identify. Schools receive grants for a number of different purposes. Some schools may be using those grants to employ other members of staff. If that's the case, the estimate that Nancy's just giving you in terms of national insurance, those staff will not be picked up in that estimate. So we would need, when that comes through, we'd need to understand that a little bit further.
Yeah, but most of those grants flow through the council, don't they? And there's clear terms and conditions around those grants as well, aren't there?
There's a lot, as we said earlier, that are passported straight to the school, and then it's up to the school how they invest those. Some schools may invest them in permanent staff, some may contract people in for particular purposes, some may invest in other ways.
Okay.
That is what we can't account for today. Nancy can give you today a figure which is just giving you of the national insurance impact on teachers, teachers' assistants, support staff that are funded through the formula.
Okay. Thanks, Nancy.
Can I continue on, Chair, with some of Councillor Allard's points? So I'll just do the reserves before I come in about individual school balances. So the opening balance was £6.6 million at the when we came into the 23-24 financial year. And the closing balance at the 31st of March 24 was 891,000. Then in respect of the current financial year, we were supposed to then, we were looking at a net deficit on reserves of around £2.3 million. And that was in the report that went to Cabinet then in the summer. And that was a cumulative £2.3 million. Actually, in the budget pack that you've got, that's now estimated to have reduced to a net deficit of £1.4 million. And obviously, we are now meeting with schools as we speak to update that position even further again. I think there is some slight movement further on that for quarter 3 because we have had extra grants through. So that figure will reduce a bit further. And then we'll obviously have the year end then to work with schools then to see if there's any further updates, but the finance meetings that are currently taking place will update those figures even further in respect to that. And then you mentioned as well the actual drawdown from reserves. We cannot guarantee there will be no drawdown from reserves because it is on an individual school basis. So if you've got a school and you will have more perhaps so in the primary sector where their balances are in excess of the school funding regulations, which is 50,000 as an example, and it's 100 for secondary and special, then those schools will need to review, and we'll need to review it with the Education Service as to how they intend on using those balances going forward. Because we have got a change of what schools were previously working to with flat cash and now the proposals for Cabinet. So we need to work through those proposals carefully in terms of what it means for each individual school. We can't just have it won't be a full, there will be no use. Schools who have got reserves will need to use those for the benefit of the pupils in their school currently. And, we'll work with Anwyn's team and our HR colleagues through that, in terms of that advice to schools and that support. Thank you. I think that was the 3 points, Councillor Allard.
Yeah, I can't find that data on the school reserves in this budget pack.
No, I'm scrolling through it, Allard, and
it's point 3.122. Table 7, page 31 in the pack.
Oh, I was on.
Okay, just where Allard's looking for that. We as a scrutiny committee are trying to get this budget into an acceptable position for our school. But we've seen a drawdown in those reserves. So schools have gone through incredible pain. And it takes us back to Councillor Lucy's point at the opening of this revenue budget. Schools have gone through that pain. And I'm not really confident that we've got schools in a position now whether they can deal with this budget, because we've seen the reduction in the budget. So they've got rid of their staff, they've reduced curriculum, and it's a very difficult position for us as a scrutiny committee to consider a budget which continues to make schools uncomfortable. Allard.
And that's part of the reason I was asking around the FTEs as well. Lots of the secondary schools are under particular pressure, aren't they? I think I don't know what the total deficit for the secondary schools is, because this table is a net position, isn't it? I don't know whether you've got that figure for total deficit within the schools, primary and secondary sectors, but yeah, yeah. Does anybody have that FTEs, number of teachers employed, support staff, etc.? Sorry, thank you.
I think we'd have to come back on the number of FTEs, Councillor Allard, but I think there is a point around that. If schools are going through management changes, some will go through naturally, whether they had whatever funding they had in that respect, because they may need to lose classes naturally. So we do work through that with schools, and that's always been the case, within school budgets. So some things will happen naturally in terms of loss of staff as well, which is all linked to classes and depending on the need that's in the schools, particular need that's in there in each cohort. But obviously Amwyn can talk about that element, but it will differ depending on what's going on and what the pupil numbers are in terms of what's presenting. Thank you.
No, and certainly it'd be helpful to have the pupil numbers over those 3 financial years as well as the teacher numbers as well. But the pressure on secondary school is, there's no doubt about it. Got a high proportion of them are in some sort of Eston category, aren't they? And Gwynfor's talked before about the standards from a previous scrutiny. Anyway, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Bit of clarity on some of that information. We'd be very grateful for that. Councillor Ansler.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So I was interested in what I think it was Nancy who talked about all the other work that goes on behind the scenes, the other groups. Obviously, as a governor, I'm aware that we have finance surgeries with our officers, we have school improvement officers and all the rest that come into school to support. But it was that behind the scenes in particular I'm interested in. So you talked about the school's funding formula committee. I don't think I was aware of that, but so that is separate to the school's forum committee. Yes. So both of those, they're made up of council officers, head teachers or school staff and governors. Is that right?
Yep.
So what I'm interested in is, how does their work, their findings, their recommendations feed into the service? And how do we know about that? How do we know that the service are taking on board their ideas, their recommendations, etc.? And do we know, and have I missed that point, basically, really? Yeah. How do we know that it's worthwhile? Are we just meeting to talk about things, or is it being taken on board? Is it having a positive impact? How does it influence the direction of travel? Am I making sense?
Amwyn will come in with a little bit more detail, Angela, but basically the funding formula review group looks at the challenges being faced by schools, comes up with recommendations for alterations, or looks at specific areas of interest. So the recent one was ALN. The previous year it was looking at the special schools. Prior to that, there'd been a complete review of primary, and before that, secondary. Their work programme and responses feed through into the school's budget forum, who then look at that in detail. I sit on the school budget forum. I don't sit on the formula review. That then feeds into recommended changes to the funding formula, which then come through the political process, officers, the checks on and balances on that, and then through to me as a portfolio holder. And if it's a major set of changes, through into proposals that come to cabinet. If it's smaller proposals that are just what you might say are tinkering around the edges, it could come through as a portfolio holder decision, but so far they've always come to cabinet. So that's the constant ongoing review process, so that there is a direct feedback from the classroom and the governors meeting right the way through to cabinet, and hence with the recommendations that come forward that scrutiny can comment on into the wider authority. So it is, I would say, it is the crucial body and set of bodies that ensure that the funding at the classroom level is being apportioned in a way that is equitable in respect of the needs of individual schools based on their pupil numbers and distribution, and whether they are dual stream or single stream.
Okay, so there's 3 groups then: the funding formula review group, the school budget forum, and the schools forum. So is it 3 groups then?
2.
Two. Okay, the school budget, school forum are the same one. Okay, so that sounds really, that's great. So you are having these meetings with the staff, the head teachers, with the governors, you're listening to what they're saying. But how do we know as a scrutiny committee? Do the report, I think you've said to Chloe she could sit in on one, but then you actually said they're not recorded live. Is that right? I'm a bit confused about how we know.
That was my mistake, I'm afraid. I wasn't sure if the school budget forum was live or not. No, so but as I said, I'm an invitee in there as an observer.
So we know through yourself. Okay, I was just working out how it all feeds through and how we can be sure, based on concerns that Aled is raising there. How can we be sure that we are listening to our head teachers and the school staff about the challenges they're facing?
The documents that come to you and the changes that come to you in respect of the funding formula is the shared project outputs, for want of a better word, from that process. So it comes feedback, requests from officers if we've identified something on the officer side, but there is the facility through the representatives for the schools community to bring forward their own requests for review and change.
It may be an interesting piece of work for scrutiny. Actually, we used to have the funded formula review group present to scrutiny. We haven't done that for some time.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think that would be interesting, or at the very least, maybe just to have a list of what their recommendations have been over the last period of time or X number of meetings or something. I don't know, but yeah, it sounds like good work is going on behind the scenes, so that's a positive, I think. Thank you.
I think it's an interesting comment, Angela, because there will be sets of minutes that we can peruse. So they may be a bit that we should probably access them and make them available to our members. Councillor Anwin, not Councillor Anwin, I'm promoting you, Anwin. Anwin.
Thank you. And I one very small thing that I want to add, which you just said there, Chair, is that the minutes of the school's budget forum are in the public domain. So they are available. So we could ask perhaps Kath to be able to share them with you once they're ratified so that you're kept up to speed.
We are approaching 12:30 and we need to put some recommendations together, but I don't want to curb any questions because obviously this is a very important item. So if you have got further questions, let's get them in quick. Councillor Lucy.
Yeah, this isn't a question, Grimver, but just to be clear that the funding formula is the way that the overall package is divided up between the schools, but it doesn't decide what the total amount of money is, does it? So, it affects how it's split between individual schools, but it doesn't mean that there's enough money in the pot for those individual schools to cover their costs.
That's a good point to finish on. Yeah. Okay. Are we in a position that we draw up some recommendations here now, or how do you want to deal with the committee? We are running out of time. Aled.
Chair, did we want to talk about this capital programme?
Okay. How do officers feel in relation to extending the meeting beyond 12:30? Can we stretch till 1 o'clock? How are people's diaries looking?
Well, my point might be really quick, and nobody wants to say anything about it. But I was really disappointed with the layout of the capital programme in this year's budget. Lots of headings were sort of squeezed into two or three big ones. So I can't really understand the flow. There's been significant pushing of the capital programme into the long grass. Previous years we've had individual projects listed. It's not so this year, and there's a strong relationship between investment in new schools and the backlog of maintenance and the transformation, as Bryn talked about previously. And sometimes I feel we are starting to go backwards over the last couple of years with this negativity about the capital programme, and we're not delivering for the young people in Powys. We can see that through the standards, through Eston category, and a number of other factors. I know. I've seen James is put his camera on. I know what James will say is about around the affordability, but we need to understand the negative side as well about not investing in our school stock, and and it will lead to closures of schools. There's no doubt about it. But if you've got that investment that goes alongside the potential of a community losing their school, it is a little bit of carrot and stick to support that transformation. I think we've lost our way. Thank you.
Okay, Marianne, I'm going to go to James first, and then I'll come to you.
I was hoping you'd go to Marianne first. Morning, afternoon now, members. Just a brief outline of why it's only one line in the capital programme. The amounts in there are based on the SOP that was submitted to Welsh Government as part of their Sustainable Communities for Learning programme that was submitted earlier in the year. So it's the same schemes that were outlined in that. There's been a few minor tweaks for reprofiling between 24, 25 and 25, 26. But rather than highlight each scheme individually, we thought there was an issue with people tendering and having full awareness of the council's full budgets for these schemes, and possibly tendering up to that full amount rather than actually what it would cost them. So we've decided to sort of lump them into one line as it stands for now. If anyone wishes to see a breakdown, we could provide that, but actually we were trying to make sure that it wasn't in the public domain and people were just tendering to our full budgets rather than the actual cost of the scheme that they would tender. And there's nothing else going on more than that, really.
Sorry, Chair, but it'd be good to see perhaps in confidential session. But what has happened in recent times is that people have been tendering beyond the full amount, because we've seen a number of schemes being pulled back because the tenders are going over the top of that sum allocated. So possibly what's printed in the forward program doesn't particularly influence the end cost. It's more that inflation and other factors influence that. But thanks, James. But it would be good to see a breakdown in scrutiny sometime in the confidential session, if you prefer that. Thank you.
Councillor Aled, Marianne and Councillor Peter have raised their hands, so they might help with some more clarity as well.
Can I come in?
Yeah, go on.
Can I just say, it's nice to see the sun, but not when it's in your face. So apologies. Our ambition still stands, as we've always said, for a major capital investments programme in our schools. Our strategic outline programme was approved last year by Cabinet and Welsh Government and sets out the plans for the next 10 years. Just to point out, however, we are in challenging financial circumstances, so every business case has to be scrutinised. And I thank this committee for scrutinising Bryn Llewarch's business case recently. And we always have to consider affordability. It is key, as you said, it is key. We also have to look at whether the previous strategy of new builds mostly everywhere is appropriate, whether there are cheaper ways of addressing the problems in our school estates, whether we look at remodelling or extensions, etc., but also looking at different ways of construction. And we're in that process at the moment of looking at whether we can build them cheaper and build them quicker. I think that's where we're trying to head at the moment. That's it, really. The ambition is still there, and in order to take forward transformation, whilst we're starting to run out of places in some of our smaller schools, we will need to build. So I'm still committed, and the council is still committed to that approach, but we do have to be diligent in how we spend the money. Okay.
Thank you, Marianne. Councillor Pete.
Yeah, and Marianne picked up on one of the main points I was going to make. You'll have noticed a couple of papers have been delayed over the last month. That has been primarily as a result of Cabinet's request for a review of the construction type being used and to look at different approaches to construction, which we believe will probably bring in the costs lower and actually the build faster. The main things also to be aware of is that we do have to go through the formal processes with Welsh Government, the 3 different stages of business case going through, and then planning. And planning has been the barrier in a number of our processes. We had the delays with the Brohuggen planning because of the request to list part of the existing building. We had delays with the requests for intervention by the Minister in Bryn-Clawach. So there is no reduction in the desire to move forward with these processes, but there has been an additional layer of due diligence being put in place by myself and the rest of Cabinet to look at whether the approaches that we've used for building in the past are the most cost effective into the future. And I'm hoping within the next, well, once Estin are through next week, that we will see those papers coming forward, whether they come to you as scrutiny, because there one I think said OBC and the other next step on, or whether we will hold off, I'm not sure yet. But anything you've agreed with Marianne will be coming through in the very near future. On the wider stage, the strategic outline programme is there with Welsh Government. That sets out the timetables. It puts into place in a document a lot of the proposals that had come through Cabinet discussions, but actually hadn't made it into a full proposal for funding from Welsh Government, either as individual contracts, individual skill projects, or the wider ambition. So we have a plan. We will be delivering on it.
I lost my connection slightly there on Councillor Pete, but I'm relying on you as a committee to acknowledge that. Councillor Allen, I'm going to bring you back first before we go to Councillor Gareth.
Yes, it's really okay. You have a plan, but it's not pressing ahead at full pace. I'll take it local. Potentially there should have been a new building, Llanfallin catchment, spades in the ground now. A couple of years ago, you sort of reviewed it, so pushed it out to 10 years. Is it still at 10 years, or have those 2 years had an effect, and then now it's only 8 years away? Because that's a whole generation of children going through a secondary school in, you know, there could be better facilities.
Councillor Allen, we had to move forward within the strategic outline programme directions and guidance. There had been no additional work moved forward on the Llanfallin site. It wasn't in any programme with Welsh Government, therefore it didn't qualify to come into the programme until the 7 to 10 year window, because there had not been any of the work done needed for it to qualify sooner. The 0 to 3 year window, for example, was essentially shovel ready and just awaiting planning. So yes, it is further away than a lot of people would like, but it is at the earliest stage in the programme that the terms of the programme from Welsh Government would allow.
But you're still pressing ahead with the catchment review, closing schools, and removing investments from the community rather than
no. We're aligning the catchment review. If you looked at it, the report that came out from it aligned the development of the schools estate into a number of phases, which were then aligned with the strategic outline programme. So we can only move forward at the pace that the systems will allow us.
Sorry, Councillor Gareth, I've got Jane and Councillor David coming in. Jane first, please.
Thank you, Chair. It's just on capital really, and just some general comments from myself. The council does have a significant level of borrowing, as would all councils. Over the last few years with rising inflation, it's had a major impact on interest rates. The cost of our projects, everything is going up. So we are finding it difficult to balance what we are able to deliver against that affordability. And that inevitably is going to mean, unfortunately, that some projects will be longer before we're able to afford to actually implement them. And of course, capital receipts and disposing of assets across the council that we don't need to necessarily hang on to is a key part of that capital strategy to maintain that affordability. And I know these are all very difficult choices for all members of council, but we have to make sure we're prioritising the services that we want to invest in first, I suppose, in terms of being able to make sure we can fulfil on all of those objectives that we have. So it is a very difficult balance. I think that's what I'm really trying to highlight.
I'll go to Councillor David.
Thank you, Chair. I think Jane has covered off most of what I wanted to say, but just at a high level, I fully appreciate that you as an education committee, that you've obviously got to look after your areas, but in my position, I need to look at the wider picture, the bigger picture. And, you can't run away from the fact that this service, as other services, they're just one part of a corporate whole. And what happens in one service impacts what happens in others, because it impacts the corporate budget as a whole. And I did notice, we were talking earlier about that there were some concerns with the committee that despite this 8.3% increase in the investment in the delegated budget this year, that some members still feel that you might not be able to meet the requirements of the funding formula. I've had assurances that won't be the case, but that's yet to be seen. But what you've got to remember as well is that if we allow this capital programme to go along unchecked and uncontrolled, and if we don't actually manage these exogenous impacts around inflation, higher interest rates, etc., it's going to directly impact the revenue budget, and that's going to make it even more difficult for us to fund the services and deliver what our residents and our pupils so desperately need. And you'd end up with a situation where basically you'd have some sort of Wagnerian Gotterdammerung, and the whole edifice would collapse. So, unfortunately, we've got to see it as part of the whole and try and work within the corporate whole and understand the impacts one service is going to have on all other services, yet despite that, attempting to deliver the very, very best we can in each service. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor David, for your contribution.
Can I just say, you've got to
can I just
understand
come
the
in
cost
first,
of...
Councillor Ralid? Yeah, I'm sorry. I try to remain as neutral as I can. And we as an education committee are really concerned. We try to be neutral. But if you look at the Llanfwllyn catchment area, where there has been much work, discussions gone on, but we haven't had any solutions whatsoever. We've got overcrowded schools. We've got schools with bad maintenance. And Alex is right. You're going ahead with a school closure. Where are those pupils going to go? Because we are really, really struggling. And I understand the dilemma that you as a corporate whole have, but we have a responsibility for our schools and to provide. And I'm sorry, your assurance that you have that schools can cope with the funding formula which they have, that's not what we're picking up from as governors. Our schools are really, really struggling. Councillor Allen.
I was just going to reference the Bryn Clywach business case. The cost of doing nothing was substantially more than the new build, the liabilities of the old school, and we've got to recognise the impact of the ageing estates. I appreciate the Power's contribution is significantly less than the total cost, but I could see Gareth shaking his head, but the Power's contribution was less than the maintenance backlog within that particular build. But just a bit of an aside. But thank you, Gwynfor, for being far more eloquent than myself. Thank you.
Councillor Gareth.
Yeah, I was shaking my head at your first part of your statement, Alan, and not the last part. Yeah, once you've clarified it, I think I agree with you. The only point I was going to make was a point that James made about the reason why we've got summary details for capital, which I fully understand that. But am I right in saying the strategic outline program gave the details of the costs for each of the schools in the program, and that's a public document, so the contractors could access the data anyway through that document?
The cost outlined in the strategic outline program include risk elements to them. So the figure is a top end that deals with inflation as well.
Yeah, but it's still in there on an individual school basis.
Yeah.
I'll shut up now then.
Okay. I'm going to say we've explored as far as we can go today within our timescales. Thank you to all officers, etc., etc., etc. You've been very eloquent in your answers, and we appreciate that. Members of the committee, how do you want to deal with any recommendations that we have going forward to Cabinet? We can obviously draw up a document, but I would like members' input into that if possible. Obviously, we've covered a lot of things today. So, Councillor Chloe, Councillor Lucy.
I mean, I think there's obviously a lot of work gone into it. I probably do want to note our concerns around the how much schools are struggling to balance their budgets. It's not really a recommendation necessarily, but it is something that we've all expressed concern about today.
I think you're right. I think Aled requested some further information for our understanding of that. Councillor Gareth. Oh, sorry, Councillor Lucy first.
Yeah, no, I was going to really say the same thing as Chloe. I mean, if we could just identify those issues that we still have concerns about and don't think were fully answered, then perhaps that's a way forward. And that would be one of mine. Thank you.
Councillor Gareth.
Yeah, just quickly, Chair. I think a lot of the discussion today could be not required if officers and the Cabinet provided us with a 1 or 2 paragraph statement for each of the cost reductions and each of the pressures. That would have made it, and it doesn't have to be part of the MTFP papers. That could just be another appendix that's come out with the budget papers. I found the papers that we received too detailed in some ways. I didn't want to have, I've had the MTFP once. I don't want it 3 times, one for health and care and one for learning skills. I've actually gone and actually cut and pasted stuff so I can actually get a better understanding, so I can flick from spreadsheet to spreadsheet while we're having the discussions. But yeah, but I back you up as well, Chair. I think the openness and clarity that the officers have provided and council have provided has been really good.
Thank you. I agree with you, Councillor Gareth, and we have to remind ourselves we have 2.5 hours. I know Councillor Amanda requested an extra 30 minutes in hers and still had difficulty as a scrutiny committee. Councillor Angela.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So I want to agree with the others, thank officers, etc. We've had a lot of information, but I just would like that assurance that the voice of the schools is being heard. So I think that way through the forums, if we got some feedback about what their recommendations are and what happens to those recommendations, I think that would be quite a good positive step.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bryn.
Yeah, just with regard to the capital spending that was discussed right at the end, obviously it's long-term plan going forwards there, so they say, and I agree absolutely with that it needs to go on as possible, or it's wasted money. But I think we do need that review that they've said that could possibly be done on the number of secondary schools we need locally before more money is spent on those big capital spends. Otherwise, we could end up with brand new schools in the wrong place. That's. I don't think that I think that big capital investment, it needs to be happening as soon as possible, but it needs to be happen and spent in the right place. And the review of the number of appropriate secondary schools in Powys is has to happen first, really.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Brent. Councillor Lucy.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It was just I realised that one thing that we hadn't mentioned, which we talked about in the pre-meeting, was a general concern about the amount of time that the number of times that transformation strategy is referred to in the full budget document, but how little indication there is of what's actually been achieved in terms of transformation. So I just wanted to raise that. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, you're absolutely right, and that was something else that we didn't feel that. Sorry, officers, if I don't know if we've got any left with us, but the other thing which we discussed in our pre-meeting was the narrative surrounding the budget in relation to sustainable powers and how the expectation for schools to pick up on other services, etc. The narrative didn't read right. Councillor Pete, you're still with us. Quickly.
Yeah, very, very quickly. There's a paper being pulled together as part of the Estin review around progress and transformation and expectations in the coming 2 years. That is then going to be worked up into a full paper to come to Cabinet, which will come to you. So that side, it's not quite ready for the public domain yet, but it's very close. Remind me, what was the second bit quickly, Gwynfor? Sorry.
Sustainable powers.
The schools transformation process is the first part of sustainable powers. It was the entire program underpins that. The sustainable communities for learning process as well underpins that idea of having services within schools and alongside schools. Now, we've seen when that's been tested in the community that hasn't always been popular. For example, the proposal to move Mahuncliffe Library into the Brohovkin campus, but there is scope within all of these projects for community rooms or for meeting rooms that enable officers, adult social, children's social care, for example, to meet within a school's environment which is safe and controlled. So it is there. The narrative in the budget perhaps isn't quite as much there as some, but it is very much part of the process.
Okay, we hear what we say, but there was overall feeling the narrative didn't align with what you were telling us in the budget. But yeah, let's leave that there. Councillor Carroll.
Yeah, I mean, some of the questions that I wanted to ask have already been spoken about, but working on how the school budget is identified, how it works, and could we have some more information on that, please?
Okay, I didn't say in relation to the formula. Yeah, Councillor
Yes,
Ahmed.
sorry. Yeah.
Alid.
Thanks. I'm not sure how. There's quite a lot of questions that were going to be responded to at a later date. I'm not sure how we would deal with those, but fundamentally, it's a relationship between budget and outcomes. And I really serious concerns about the outcomes we're achieving for our children in schools, and the impact of budget on that. Maybe budget per head is adequate, but because of the estate, that has been diluted too much. And then Britain makes a really valid points with his contribution. So it's a combination of the capital, the revenue, and standards within our schools.
Good, that's a good point. I like that combination of capital. One standards.
Well, not stand. Well, revenue and the outcomes for our pupils. We got clear evidence that it's going south rather than we're below average rather than above average, and our the demographic of powers should suggest that we are above average. And you've heard the stuff on the national media that the average pupil within Wales is doing worse than those in deprived areas, average within deprived areas in England. So it's a real concern.
It is a really difficult one, and it's really difficult for we as a learning and skills scrutiny committee, because we care passionately, and most of us are on here because we have that passion for schools and learning, and it is difficult. But we understand the big picture, and that's why I thank you as officers, because I think you do understand it. I thank you as a cabinet, I really do, and I really realise it's difficult. But we as a learning and skills scrutiny committee have to consider this position of what we feel that schools are in, and that's what we're trying to do, and that's all we're trying to do. And there certainly isn't any bad feeling or anything. We're working together to try and get the learning of our pupils in Powys to the standard which they deserve. So I'm going to leave it there, if that's okay, and we will draw up some recommendations and some minutes. I know Kath is very good at noting most things, so and we'll also try and formulate some of the information that we still require as well, so that our committee can also have that furnished when we're doing the budget round as well. Okay, everybody content with that? Sorry for overrunning. I really do try to get in within time. As usual, members, if you want to stay on for some reflection, please do. I'll remind you now, members, that anything you say in reflection, we don't take forward. But it's so if you've got something burning to say, please say it now in this meeting. But otherwise, we'll go to reflection. Yep. Good. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks so much, Chair. Thank you.